So yeah, I started working in virtual reality about 2 or 3 years ago. My first project was called Notes on Blindness. I hope some of you have met Arnaud, who is my partner. He was the first one here opening the Hacking XR series. He was talking, I guess, about the creativity in VR and how, as a producer or a director, you can build a project and then make it to distribution. And the distribution part was my side of the project. Actually, I come from more of a business background. I used to have an advertising agency in Paris and sold it a few years ago before I came to New York in 2015 and starting doing virtual reality. So what you see here is the logo of our new company with Arnaud, plus 2 other partners that are Pierre and Antoine, so 4 French diaspora guys. We started this company called Atlas V about 6 months ago, and we announced 2 movies in Sundance and 3 movies in Tribeca. And the good news is that we actually, among the 3 movies that we presented, we actually sold 2 already to private distributors. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is how you build a project, how as a creator you engage in a project that has actually a sense on the market that we are talking about, in terms of production capacity, in terms of time to market, and in terms of revenue models that you can be inspired by. So first of all, and it's always a big thing about distribution, I'm not going to carry the best news out there. I think, of course, XR has a lot of potential in terms of creation. We can all be amazed by the possibilities of AR or VR, but it's still very difficult to distribute. It's not what we call a consolidated market yet. It means that we don't have a vision of a product that we are going typically to be able to commercialize to a wide audience with a level of distributed technology that is enough so we can have a sustainable market. That's not where we are today. This is where we are today, 2017. We have about 43 million unique users of VR. That was in Charlie Fink's book that came out recently. And I think it's a figure some people kind of agree on. But what's important is not the number, just the number of unique VR users, it's more the rate of adoption. If we compare VR to other technologies, how long is it going to take? People tend to believe right now that it's going to take about 10 years to reach 25% of American households, which is a good level of distribution to start having a sustainable market. It doesn't mean that we are going to have to wait for 10 years from now. It means that virtual reality, we consider, has started maybe 5 or 6 years ago as like an emerging technology. So we still have 3 to 5 years to wait to reach that 25% household level. And there's another question that is subsequent to this one, is do we really need everybody to have, do we really need 25% of the household to actually own a VR or AR headset? Or can we rely on something else, like location-based entertainment? Right now, people are strongly believing that location-based entertainment is going to be one of the ways that VR and AR can be democratized. I am not allowed to talk about the strategies of the people we work with, like Oculus or Magic Leap, but what I can tell you is that location-based entertainment is a huge part of their development strategy. So, okay, it's not great what I've been talking about right now in terms of penetration, in terms of a number of users. As a creator, it doesn't give you a good idea, and it doesn't give you like a lot of motivation to get into VR and AR with us, and I'm really sorry about that. I would prefer to carry better news. But yet, 2 things. The first one is happened in Sundance this year, and it's a project that Atlas is producing, so I know the subject pretty well. So we sold 1 movie called Spheres to a private distributor for more than $1 million. So it was like the real figure. I cannot say it because we're recorded, but I can tell you then. And that changes something because it means that private money is now helping. It's not only public funding, it's not only tech guys, it's not headset makers, but now private investors, content investors are doing studio deals with us, which means they are buying the right to exploit the material for a period of time for this kind of amounts. And it's all the more important that in Sundance this year, the independent movie industry was really slow. So actually there were more deals, we think, made in VR and in terms of global revenue also than in indie movies in Sundance. Second news that happened this year, it's Vestige, a VR experience that was presented at Tribeca Film Festival as a world premiere. Vestige was acquired even before the festival opened by another private distributor. It's called Otherset, and it's a subsidiary of Dogwoof. Dogwoof is Andy Whittaker's business in licensing, distributing content. They made Blackfish. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I'm sure you are. So Vestige is another of Atlas Productions. And so among the 3 deals that were made since January, 2 of them were produced by our company, which doesn't mean that we are any kind of genius in particular. It just means that we have a way of producing content where we can deliver a certain amount of value in a certain amount of time with hedged risk, because we bring more investors into the movies we produce. So it's not a matter of only the quality of the storytelling, it's not a matter of the technology, it's a mix of the storytelling, the technology, and the way we produce things so private investors can get in the party with us. That is what I'm going to try to explain, because of course when you look at those figures and when you look at a consolidated market, that a market that is not consolidated, and on the other side we're talking about private money, so high risk, high level of risk for investors, and you're like, you cannot understand how they can get in this business with us. So what I'm going to try to explain today is let's take a step back together and look at the context of things. Look at what we say, look at what we tell investors, and look at what's our vision of VR and AR today. And the first thing I want to comment on is enthusiasm. There's a lot of enthusiasm on VR and AR. And this is actually something we feel blessed for. It's very difficult as an innovator to have the feeling that nobody's interested in what you do. For us, it's been very hard the past years, 2 or 3 years, doing what we do, because, of course, there's not a lot of money, there's a lot of constraints, and there's a lot of sharks around there in the tank, so it's hard as an independent creator to do your things. But at the same time, we have a lot of support from 2 categories of people. The one are festivals. They have been an amazing support, and 2 are journalists. In terms of festivals, it started with Sundance maybe 4 years ago. I think our first Sundance was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And they started showing the stuff we produced. And then there was Tribeca. We actually, with Notes on Blindness, won the Tribeca Award 2 years ago, so you get to go on the scene there and carry your award and shake Robert De Niro's hand, and then you go to a corridor and people are taking pictures of you, and you just say, guys, we're just doing VR in a cave. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody has even seen what it is. And all of a sudden, about 2 years ago, I was on American TV explaining to the good American people on AOL channels and things like that, what is VR? Because actually you're there and you're trying to promote your documentary, but they're just saying, what's the difference between cardboard and Oculus Rift? And that's the kind of question you get. And what is VR? And how do you operate that thing? And what can I expect to see? So you actually end up doing the promotion of VR and AR in general. And I guess that's one thing that's very interesting in terms of innovation penetration, and in terms of how innovation comes into our life. It's actually we kind of demonstrated, or we try to demonstrate, that good content is bringing good innovation. And that's why also there's so much enthusiasm with the journalists. It's easy to talk to a journalist about VR and AR and bring him into an experience that will blow his mind. And then he's going to be so motivated and he's going to be so amazed that he's going to write articles about what we do. And we had really a lot of opportunities and a lot of great coverage recently. So in Wired, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, We had this amazing article about us in Rolling Stone that put us on the map, and we're just 6 months old as a company. So we feel very lucky that we have a lot of support from journalists, and that's helping VR and AR a lot. It's also a dangerous game because journalists, they have to sell paper. That's what they do. And all of a sudden, like an outlet like TechCrunch, for example, is like spreading the good news of our acquisitions, is talking about us, is talking about content, is talking about the market. And all of a sudden, someone wants to sell paper and says, like, this VR wave is dead. And that's what we had last year with the 360 video. And actually, journalists that really encouraged us, I think, killed the 360 video market. That, creatively speaking, is still very rich. And there's a lot to be explored as a creator. I personally, I'm not a creator. I'm not a producer. I'm doing like all of the business and distribution side. I'm the CEO of the company. But as creators, the creators I see in the company, how they operate, I feel that there's a lot of potential. I feel that they see a lot of potential in 360. Hence, for return on investment, financial, and like journalists wanting to sell paper questions, 360 has been killed in the egg. And right now, as I speak, Atlas V is producing about 10 projects, 10 different movies. 5 of them are in production. 5 others are in development with acquired funding. None of them is in 360. Still, back to enthusiasm. What makes people so enthusiastic about VR and AR? I'm wondering. So, yes, it's money. That's the first thing. That's how it all started. What's different in this wave of innovation with virtual reality that wasn't in one when Jaron Lanier was there a few years ago is that there has been this massive acquisition with Oculus, 2 billion. The total sum is more than 3 billion, actually, in this deal. And then you have Magic Leap that is valued at more than 2 billion now. So that's a huge difference between what happened then and what happens now. When you look at the global sum of investment, we are more than 2.5 billion right now in investment in financial companies, VCs, bringing funding to companies that operate the backbone of VR and AR. I'm not talking about content. All of these figures, 0 of this is going into content. It's a shame, but there are other ways, and we'll talk about it. But that's very important because this is building the backbone of what we are standing on. So whenever you have to talk as a creator or somebody operating in VR and AR, always, if you want to talk to an investor, always remind him that there's like a lot going on. There's a history already, and he's not alone in this thing. The second reason why there is so much enthusiasm is probably because we are talking about a paradigm change. I think I may be the 20th or 30th person to tell you that, so I'm going to go quickly through it. But we all believe, and that's why at Atlas we are dedicated. We are dedicated to immersive entertainment only. We believe that it's a new wave of computing. We simply believe that the screens that we had that were on movie theaters or televisions, they got closer with the personal computer. They got more social with the wave of internet. Then it became mobile. So the screen got even closer to us because it was in our hand and we could touch it. And now we can command it with our voice and our eyes, putting that in front of our head. And the next wave, that's the fourth wave of computing. It's just like we have a different relationship. We create a different relationship to the screen. And ultimately, the screen is going to get into our head at one point. That's what we believe. It means that the screens are probably going to disappear and not appear as natural as we see them. And that's why we could say screens are so 2020 in a sense, because that's maybe something that we will say, or maybe not us, but maybe our children or the children of our children. And I can picture a world, I can totally imagine a world where my grandchildren will tell each other stories of like my grandfather, when he wanted to be entertained, he was looking at a screen. Lol, right? So, I think what is natural for us is not going to be natural for the generations to come. And that's what we try to envision every time we do a new project. What is the purpose of each of our new project in the big scale of things, of screens disappearing. That's how you sell a project. How I sold Vestige to a distributor, I talked to Andy and I told him, Vestige, it's not only a love story. It's not a story about grieving. You're not only following a woman that is telling you about how she lost her husband and it's terrible. Of course it's that, but it's more than that. It's a relationship with holograms. We create in Vestige, we are the first piece where you can like nearly feel the holograms touching you. You know, that's what we created. The story is bringing a new relationship to the image. That's what we are selling in Vestige, and that's why we sold that piece before even Tribeca started. And another thing that is amazing about VR and AR is that when you look at pop culture, it's a fun fact, but it always predicts the future. And the reason why pop culture always predicts the future is because artists and storytellers, people like you, they are always talking about things that they don't know. They have to imagine the impossible. And that's how everything that we know today actually came to happen, whether we like it or not. And that's how maybe, you know, Da Vinci created a lot, like maybe I think there's 100 machines that exist today that were predicted at Da Vinci's time. That's how Star Trek is talking, of course, about the holodeck. That is a phantasm we all surf upon right now. And that's how we can ask, do you think that's air you're breathing right now?
It's still that.
So now that I've said that, so it's again, we are in a context of distributing, monetizing. So you're talking to investors. It's really important to remind them of the context of what is the kind of money that has been poured into the backbone of VR and AR. What is the kind of environment we're talking about? And then now let's try to get like really I'm going to try to give you something really palpable. I know I don't have a lot of time, but we are going to look at monetization, what it looks like now, and one question that is really obvious is, okay, if monetization happens in all of the media landscape, it's for sure that XR is going to take one of these monetization model and try to copy it. So we can get to a sustainable market at one point. That's just like a simple methodology, right? So let's look at the different monetization models that we know and see how we can apply that to VR and AR. The first one, most obvious, that always existed, is upfront payment. You want something, you pay for it. And that's iTunes, that's like VOD when you buy a movie on any platform, and that's also anything you can do in video game. Video game is actually the best example for VR because they have tried, the video game guys have tried the upfront premium model. They went there. So they started producing content, I think back in 2014, 15, early days in the Oculus. They were the only one Oculus would talk to, saying VR and AR is the future of gaming. So we're going to start subsidizing those guys. So Oculus started giving money to studios like Ubisoft and others, like smaller studios. So they could get started. What did they realize? They realized that in terms of production, it was very complicated to do VR, much more than another video game, mainly because of the frame rate issue. A lot of other issues, but frame rate is a really big one. And then, like, you end up doing a prototype, you end up doing a game and putting it on the market. And what's the price point? The price point, most of the time, is between $25, $35. It's a lot of money, especially for gamers who already have to buy an equipment. And when you are spending $25 to $35 on something, it better be good. And most of the time, it wasn't. It was more or less like a prototype. So they started doing something that was more or less prototyping, but they wanted to sell it on the other end. So what they actually did is like they rushed their industry into the wall because of putting a price point on something that people were not seeing the value of. So as entertainment, the entertainment industry, we decided collectively right now, and with Oculus also, not to put a price point on what we do. So most of the movies that are financed by Oculus, right now you can find them for free. Because for us, it's better to have something for free and to create the value, to create the users, to create the relationship with the users, to then understand what we are going to be selling to them and not try to rush to one business model. Advertising model. This one is my favorite because I actually come from advertising, and this country and especially in Silicon Valley, the advertising model has changed so many things. And I just want to say quickly about the advertising model that I want to talk about a time that was 80s and 90s where it was the golden age of advertising model, and everything was amazing, and empires were built in the 80s and the 90s on the simple fact that if you were a brand and you were able to buy some time on television channels, you could look and go through advertising agencies that created a magic format called the 30 second. And you could buy a lot of time and have a lot of 30 seconds broadcasted to every home in America or in the world, and then people would magically go to their supermarket and buy the stuff. And that was a magic circle that happened over and over again, and that built empires like these big brands we all know, Unilever and everything, all of these people that now own pretty much the world. So advertising is actually a good way, is actually a very magic ecosystem where a lot of money circulates, and the user is in the middle. The user is both exposed to brands and is also a consumer, and but is kind of overexposed. And the advertising model right now is this magic circle I'm describing is not working anymore. And why is it not working? Because of these little guys, YouTube, because of the internet in general, because now audiences are fragmented. And that's what we call attention economics. It's not as easy now to capture your attention as a consumer. So there's a lot to say about the advertising model and the impact it's going to have on VR and AR. It's probably going to be huge, but right now we are not able to apply this model really directly to VR and AR, as the numbers and the penetration is not there yet. The numbers of households connected to VR and AR are not there. But still, we have another project I didn't mention called Battlescar that we were presenting in Tribeca. Actually, YouTube bought the first chapter of Battlescar to exploit it in 360. So they are getting there. They are getting in the game. Another model that's very interesting for us to look at is freemium. So freemium was pretty much invented in the mobile gaming environment, and the idea was, if you look at classic editors or publishers like Rovio, who did Angry Birds, they just put that on a platform, advertised, and they made a lot of money, probably in the 90 or 100 million a year when it was on the top. But then some people like Candy Crush came and said, we have no barrier to entry, it's for free. And all of a sudden, they had massive download, millions. And how many of those people were they able to monetize? I don't know if you know. It's 4%. Yeah. So 4% only are doing all of the business. But do you know what's the ratio between what Rovio was making and what Candy Crush is making? It's more than 10 times. They were doing 1 billion a year at one point with Candy Crush, only with 4% of the population. So whoever in this room or in this country or whatever does that with VR and AR, everybody's winning at the end of the day, because the penetration of a content like this is really huge. And this is something we actually really should look at. When you look at something like Pokemon Go, it's a good example of how AR can be distributed through mobile platform. Personally, I encourage you to do that. Personally, I wouldn't do it. I think that mobile marketplaces are awful Darwinist marketplaces where if you don't have millions to spend in marketing, you never make it to the top 800. Before I did Atlas, I invested in a mobile content company, and I just it just failed. I just went out before it gone burst, because actually it's not something that works because the ecosystem is not good. The mobile ecosystem made by Apple and Google today are not sustainable for little content makers. It's not an environment I'm personally interested in. Of course, if you have a lot of connection and if you have opportunities and you think that your product is amazing and you're going to make it to the top, you can go there. But it's really really wild. It's not something I'm personally comfortable with. And then there's another kind of disruption that happened recently that is called subscription-based. So I think pretty much all of you may have a Netflix account, whether you buy it or you stole it from someone, or a Spotify account or or things like that. And it may look like nothing to just be spending $5 or $10 a month on something, but it's actually a very it's an incredible move, because what they say and what they did is actually make us acknowledge that we need content. Why? Because they went from a market that was basically a product market. I have a cultural product, I sell it, you buy it, there's an exchange. So my risk as a producer is leveraged by the number of sales I do. For them, as platforms, they're saying we don't sell products. We don't commercialize product. We are a service. So as long as you pay our service, you can access all of our catalog. So it means that they are selling content, they are selling culture as a service and not a product anymore. It means as a consumer, you acknowledge the fact that you need content, which for us as producers is kind of amazing. You know, as an idea, it's like an unlimited source of revenues. If you, more than that, look that any subscription that you're adding is actually building a pile of money for Netflix and Amazon and all of these guys. So as an investor, of course, you prefer to invest in a line that is like just like this. The more users, the more money every month. It's simple for everybody. But there's also a little problem with that. It's the ecosystem. And of course, they are disrupting a model, but they are disrupting a model that created a lot of activity. I don't know how many of you followed what happened with Netflix and Cannes last week. Yeah. You haven't seen that, so yeah. So do you want to maybe?
So there's a rule in Cannes that you cannot show a film that will not follow French distribution rules, which basically mean it will play in French theaters. And Netflix has recently, is not just buying movies afterwards. They're distributing movies before they ever hit theaters, and they have a very specific. Sometimes they'll put them in theaters to get Oscar campaigns and things, but it's usually simultaneously while they're streaming them. And France has these very arcane rules where it has to wait 36 months after premiering in theaters before it can be on a streaming platform, which is completely antithetical to the Netflix model. And so last year they had a sort of, they squared off around this, but eventually both sides kind of relented. Or no, Cannes relented last year. And then the head of the film festival got a lot of pushback from the French theater owners. And so this year he played hardball and, for example, to show how much power Netflix has now, they're gonna distribute Alfonso Cuarón's new film, who's a very famous Mexican film director, and they were going to premiere it at Cannes. It's called Roma, and then it was going to be on Netflix, and it was already accepted for competition, and then basically this fight erupted, and so Netflix pulled all its movies, and so
Cannes rejected it.
Cannes rejected it, but is that what finally happened? Because they were like...
Yeah. No, Cannes said like Netflix is not allowed in competition.
Okay, so now there's no Cannes film, no Netflix films, including
in Cannes.
Alfonso Cuarón's film in Cannes.
Yeah. So if I were to do a vote, like you have people like a subscription-based business, Netflix, saying we need culture to be available to every consumer. Right on. We don't want this media chronology. And on the other side, you have people like Cannes saying we need media chronology. If I do a vote, please raise your hand. It's not like there's no correct answer, but I just want to know what seems to you as like the best model. Do you think media chronology is a good model, or would you think that Netflix subscription-based is a best model? So who would vote for Cannes, for example? And who would vote for Netflix? Okay, so it's more like Netflix. I would personally vote for Cannes. Right? Why? Because even if subscription model is great because it enables a lot of culture to make it to the consumers. So even if they're spreading culture everywhere. On the other side, they also, whenever they buy content, if they are the only distributor, it means that as a creator, you basically belong to them, right? There's no power, there's no negotiation. If I were to sell something to Netflix, I would know that I would lose all of my power. It would become a Netflix product. Right? In the current ecosystem that we have, that Cannes is defending, and it's not because I'm French, I actually don't really like Cannes. They don't support us very, very well, in VR and AR. So But actually they are defending media chronology, which means you have different windows of exploitation as a content producer, which means you can go to movie theaters first in your country, which means you can go to television in your country and then have international rights. You can have any exploitation window you want, and then you're going to deal with different distributors. So you have a very rich ecosystem that as a producer is building, so they're buying those different distribution windows, and that's how you build your project. If you have a project and you sell it to Netflix, they decide at the end of the day, if they concentrate too much power, they will decide of the budget you will be working in, and they will decide pretty much of the content that will be in there. And they will say, we made a poll, and we know now that people like this and like this. At that moment, people are falling asleep, so you should change your movie. Right? So this is the kind of things that we are anticipating now with subscription-based models. So my advice would be, okay, let's look at subscription-based model as a disruption of the market that is pretty good because it brings content to the market, to consumer. But as a content producer, please try to not only make deals with those guys, or actually, if you do, and we do sometimes, some of our movies are on Hulu, I can tell you that we are pretty tough in negotiations. And we are not being impressed because they are Hulu or whatever. And then the last model that is very interesting and I wanted to talk about is location-based. Location-based business, as I said as an introduction, looks like something very encouraging for VR and AR. And it's actually an old model. It's maybe the oldest model of all because it's all of the movie theaters we are talking about that have been existing for more than 100 years. They use location-based. What is location-based? It's actually location-based is answering to one simple question. What is the price per minute you're ready to pay to be exposed to a cultural product? The price currently is $10 for about 2 hours. What Hollywood did, and that so movie theaters and cinema was invented in France as an art form, but actually never made it to a cultural product. The US did that, and they were particularly successful of doing it with The Wizard of Oz. I think this very old classic movie that was the first one to use VFX and define the code of what is a good cultural product. That is something that lasts for like an hour and a half or 2 hours, and that has a lot of VFX. And I'm ready to go out of my own house to experience this amazing show, and with The Wizard of Oz, I mean it's just personal theory, but I think they started really this new return on investment model. That means as I have a cultural product, I exploit it in location-based, and then I have like these windows and territories, and then Disney and Lucasfilm added the merchandising part, and that's what we call the Hollywood model right now, right? You have different revenues, exploitation revenues coming from different sides of the world and different mediums, and that's how you build IPs. And whenever you do location-based, you have to look at the power of your IP, of your intellectual property. That's what everybody is interested in. This is, for example, an image that I'm not supposed to show, but this is an image of one of our next movies. And we think that, for example, it's the kind of movie that you want to see in location-based. You want to see it in ideal conditions with great screen, great mediation, and you want to have like the feeling that things are happening around you, because the story is that you're stuck on a planet that like triggers different kind of souvenirs around you. So it's like projecting the souvenirs of this character in front of her. And that's something you want to experience in location-based and not only in your home. So basically, what we looked at right now were all of the different models and how we think we could apply it to VR. And as you noticed, I didn't tell you I have a magic recipe and this is where things are going to go. It's not going to be like that. It's never going to be like that. It relies on you, on who you are, on what's your project, on how and what you want to do, and what's the impact you want to have on VR and AR, to choose the kind of model and distribution model that you will operate on. But basically, there's a way of remembering how you can operate. It's different philosophies. What I described through all of these things were actually different philosophies. There are 3 philosophies for me in content creation today that you can play on. The first one is the Silicon Valley model. They are HMD makers. They are the ones that invested in Oculus. They are the ones that are doing Google Cardboard, for example. But ultimately, I don't think they really want to sell you headsets. What they want to sell is yourself to advertisers. They are advertising marketplaces. That's how they change the world every day. That's text link in Google. That's ads in YouTube. That's marketplace in Facebook. That's how they make most of their money. And VR and AR is not going to change anything about that. It's just going to add. I was mentioning attention economics. Attention economics just is a simple it's a simple fact that we are so like the media is so granulated. You have zillions of TV channels, and then you have your second screen when you're watching TV, when you're going on services like Facebook and Google. So you never have like 3 seconds of attention. Attention is the new golden currency. Your attention is the new golden currency. And so I'm sure that you will agree that VR and AR, they are actually able to captivate you. And we are able as VR AR creators to captivate users in one of our experiences for a definite amount of time. So this is where the value is for the Silicon Valley model. The more you're able to capture users' attention, the more value you create. That's why you can imagine the price of a contact. I think the price of per contact on Facebook is maybe 0.10 or 0.08 cents, something like that. That's what it costs as an advertiser to go put an ad onto someone's screen that is probably not going to be seen. I think you can multiply that by 100 or maybe 1,000 with an ad that would run into a headset. But then the question becomes, when do you place it, how you place it, what's gonna happen in the advertising model? We don't know yet, but you have to remember, I think, as content creators, that is what's at the end of the day, what matters for the people you talk to, especially with Silicon Valley actors. Second thing is the second model is what I call Hollywood model. So I described it before. With it's just about Hollywood model is just about building IP, building intellectual property, and then being very aware of the value of your intellectual property through time and territories and exploitation revenue models. So you basically sell some exclusivity, then you have different windows of exploitation, then you can do merchandising. You have a lot of opportunities to have distribution revenues from what you build. But if you do that and if you go this road, that's what we do with some of the movies we produce. It means you get to play by their game, by their rule. One of the movies we did was Fears. We co-produced with Darren Aronofsky. The first chapter was narrated by Jessica Chastain, the second one by Patti Smith. And when you look at the movie, in the first seconds of the movie, even if we produced everything was made in France, the first image you see is Darren Aronofsky presents, because we think that's where the value is, just purely and simply. On Battle Scar, for example, we have Rosario Dawson that is narrating the content. And we try to rely on her a lot on the marketing plan, especially when we will deliver the content to the world later this year. And the third model is what I call the European model. This one is a bit particular, as you can see, and it's just very different. And I know how weird it can look, but it just means, and when I say European, I don't mean it as a territory, I mean it as a philosophy, because I think Canada is actually a really good example of a European philosophy, which is actually in Europe, which is where cinema, movie theaters were invented. We don't believe that any cultural product is necessarily a return on investment enabled product. So we don't necessarily believe that any art form is an entertainment, which means is universal. We don't necessarily believe that artists have to work in certain constraints, like a Hollywood model with stars or with some kind of storytelling to succeed. We also think that if artists want to talk about violence, they should do. If we want to talk about any problem in society, they should do and not be constrained to do. and more than that, if we want to show nudity, we should do. Actually, a lot of content, in France and even more in Italy, for example, are having nudity, and nobody's offended by that. When I came to the US 3 years ago, and I was like seeing some of our work or some of the things that were adapted to the American market, I was so shocked to see the number of constraints there was in terms of censorship. For us, it's just completely unnatural. My wife is a comic book artist, so her books were adapted to the US, and so you cannot imagine the numbers of nipples she had to erase from her books. Well, anyway, so all of this to say that I'm not saying that the European model is better. I'm saying that it's also a part of the ecosystem, and it's a very important part of the ecosystem because actually it kind of hedges the risk of return on investment player. When I'm saying that, it means that all of the projects I'm talking about, all the ones that I sold in the US, were actually started with a European funding because they were the only one able to jump into a story, into content, and to say, okay, we don't care if you're going to make money with it, but we believe that this story has to exist. And with that kind of love money, that we come in the US and we have a leverage on the investors, and we are saying now we are substantially reducing your share of risk because we brought some investment from outside. And we have like some money coming from this and there, and we have like headset makers. And now, as a private investors, you just have to complete the gap or to buy, so you have licensing rights, right? So so this is how I want to conclude that there's no magic rule to monetizing and to distributing. There's no magic formula. I think it depends a lot on where you come from, who you are, what you want to do in VR, and who you are able to connect with your story. And I really encourage you to reach out to a lot of companies and a lot of people with different backgrounds that will help you to build your content. And finally, the reason why, as a company, we're able to sell is because our way of producing is not considering that we are the masters of the world and we are going to do something that is great and that has a terrific value on the market. That's not the way we think of it. We just think of it as stories that we want to push out because there's a real reason why it should exist in VR and AR, and then be around the best storytellers and co-produce with people. So get to other companies like us, co-produce with them, consider that there's no competition, and try to get something out in a reasonable amount of time for a reasonable amount of money. And hedging the risk of private money. And that's how you get out and distribute what you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have time for questions. I like to say, first of all, thank you. I think it's like the question mark that we don't answer. We see talks and festivals, and it's always kind of, yeah, but it's so hard to monetize. And yet these guys in about 6 months, but even before, I think the four of you currently there have been doing the only fiction VR projects that I would see everywhere that were about the most seeing, such as Altération,
I Feel
It. So projects that we see talked about a lot when people mention the first experiences they've tried in fiction, first experience in documentary, which was Notes on Blindness, and now currently just taking over Tribeca and Sundance. You guys are four very different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. Could you expand a little bit maybe and to open like discussions about the idea of ecosystem? Because I know yesterday you mentioned the idea that if you want to create an ecosystem, it's also a belief not just in monetizing it, but making sure that it's an art form that exists for a long time.
Sure. Yeah, we that's what we said, and that's actually the reason why we got a really good article in Rolling Stones, is that we met a journalist in Sundance, and we explained to her, we are not here to, to raise millions and to appear as the company that is going to save VR. We advocate for the independent production model. So we think independent production model is going to save VR because independent production means co-production, means co-creating, means bringing money from all over the world, means reducing risk for private investment. So at the end of the day, there's more private investment if there's more indie production. That's the way we see the ecosystem. So that's why we try to be vocal on the deals we do, not because we want to make more deals. At the end of the day, we only have 2 hands and 2 legs. We're already in 10 movies right now, and I don't think we can produce anyone more right now. It's just really complicated. But we think that if more companies were doing like this and advocating like us for the indie production model and the co-production model, we think we could have a sustainable environment in 3 to 5 years when VR takes off.
Thanks so much for a great presentation. My question is about sort of the differentiating between AR and VR. So you repeatedly said sort of AR and VR or XR, but it feels like there might be very different models that are going to be successful for them. AR, the most obvious being this and the device, and the fact that with Google releasing the documented AR development APIs and specs, there's this flood of new app developers putting out simple AR apps into the market. You can, if you look for AR in the Play Store now, you'll find just in the last month, dozens of small apps that people are releasing to do simple things like place objects in space, and none of them are really monetized yet, but that's clearly the direction that's going. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, about differentiating between the two.
Yeah, actually, so with AR, we say we are an immersive entertainment company. We do mostly VR because we think it's more immersive. But we have a few projects in AR. One of them is in production right now. I'm not 100% sure I can mention it with like the camera rolling, but I will talk to you about it later on. One big question around AR is actually the distribution. We are having intense debate with the financiers, with the people who funded back the project, on whether we should go to mobile platforms, which I told you, hate, or we should go to web AR and develop everything we want to do with the web AR technology. Web AR technology is not very ready yet, but we would be working with Mozilla directly to make that happen and to make the technology better for when what we do is coming out. So yeah, just to answer that, I think AR has a crazy potential, but it means going through the mobile marketplaces, and I don't think it's going to be easy for storytellers. It hasn't been easy for storytellers to do mobile gaming. You don't have a lot of clever gaming out there. Clever mobile apps out there that people are massively downloading. There's no reason why there would be a lot of clever AR content out there that people are massively downloading.
And maybe just to extend from that, but to step away from technology, AR, also because of the sequence in which we encounter things, seems to do well if we already have a story. It's a great way to amplify moments in a story, but it's maybe not the best vehicle to tell a story. And it made me think, when I talk to people in the industry, they tend to think they're thinking of film or television or VR, but actually as an ecosystem, thinking about, or to use the old word transmedia, these can be very effective. VR can be quite effective of getting a moment, drawing in an audience, but maybe not bearing the brunt of the whole story. So how does that work given the kind of mentality distinctions, the silos that you're having to do?
So a very interesting point, because actually I didn't mention it, but there's one of the movies that was,
transmedia.
but Notes on Blindness is transmedia, but there's one of the movies that we are currently showing in festivals. I cannot tell you which one. That like an American company bought the rights of exploiting the content in AR. So we are discussing right now of like whether we should give them the assets and they could do that in their studio and do an AR app adapted from our movie. And so like as content producer, we can either license and just let them do and control, or we can do it ourselves and deliver. But they want to use our content to show to distribute AR, like to show that AR can be something great in terms of storytelling. So they would use one of our VR movie and our assets to do that. So yes, I think it's an ecosystem. For us, AR and VR, I mean, for me, VR and AR are marketing terms. Like they have no reality. I think what we do is just storytelling with real-time technology. So we just tell stories in real time most of the time. Sometimes we use volumetric capture, but we also try to be in real time again. So I mean, I don't really understand. I don't usually comment on the VR, AR, XR, MR kind of things. I think everybody is pretty much confused. No, I mean, we just say we do storytelling in real time, and then what we think is that at the end of the day, what is the value? And for AR, it's very important with that. I had a call this morning with my partners, and we were talking about that. And we were saying, whatever we show in festivals, like a lot of festivals are telling us we want AR. Please give us our AR piece. Like festival curators are calling us right now. We know you are working on AR. Please give us that. We know it's going to be great. And we are like, no, because, well, first of all, it's not ready. But even if it was, we would need a special setup. We would need to know the room to have a really great AR experience, because most of the time, actually, the AR experience you have, they are pretty poor, because like you know, it's not something that we feel is immersive. So we, as a company, will never ever launch something under our name that is not immersive. We have no interest in doing that. So whatever we do, we will try to have something deliver a high level of quality to the end user. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for the talk. So I wanted to ask about, speaking of ecosystems, about so-called shovelware, this idea of quantity over quality, of having a low barrier to entry, so you get a lot of titles in an ecosystem. It's something that's come up with Steam a lot, and recently with the Oculus Go reviews, noting that even, it says on the box, thousands of titles available because it's connected to the Gear VR store.
Yes.
And it's literally true, but then all the reviews mention there's maybe only a handful of things you actually want to look at. So I was curious how you see the role of something like shovelware. Is that an inevitable part of this ecosystem, or is there to that?
So very straight to the point, we have no content on Steam. That's it. We don't want to be in an ecosystem where it's just like revenue sharing on a platform, and just you get out there in the wild, nobody's helping you, and then you just cross your fingers and hope that you're going to make $10,000. It's not something that we want to do. So we actually do not operate with HTC. We are in talks with them, but we chose not to release any of our content on those platforms. And on Oculus Go, it's same kind of thing. I think we can only release really good content, so we want to create a relationship with the user where he can probably download something for free, maybe the first chapter of the experiment, but it has to be so good that he wants to buy the rest of it. Right now, we are not really feeling confident about that, so we are still working on it. So no, I don't believe in like this massive ecosystem, because then it means if your content is not too good, you need to spend a lot on marketing, and I don't think anybody is ready to do that in VR and AR right now, so we still need to work on the content way more. I'm actually really, really frustrated when I go to festivals and I see what's out there. Most of the things I see between you and me, I think it's prototyping. I don't think it's a level of quality that should be shown in festivals. So we are in a situation right now in AR or VR where we just need to professionalize, where we need more money, we need more private investment. It's not because people are not talented. I know a lot of very, very talented people, but they're working with no money. So at the end of the day, what you have in festival is something that is a good idea, that has a good spark, some technological demo, but it's just like not nice to watch because it's not a finished product. So, and a lot of them are making their way to the stores, and that's even worse because then you're losing the users at the end of the day. Yeah.
A philosophical question, the Silicon Valley model. So these are businesses that also work with data primarily. And I know right now the commercial headsets are not doing eye tracking, but I know all the sets here are doing tracking.
Mm-hmm.
That would seem to me to be a big monetization model. The data that we get from where we're looking, what our heart rates are, whatever. Is that something that's in your horizon yet? Or?
Yes, not now, but yes, there will be plans for this company. Right now, we are only doing production. We are doing immersive storytelling content. But of course, what we want to do ultimately is have an impact on the market. And the way to have an impact on the market is to release technology and assets. And among the technology and assets we will be releasing, there will be things that we do in research and development. I will open this year a research and development facility in France, with actually people looking at what you're mentioning. It's going to be eye tracking a little bit, but I think it's pretty much covered. What I'm really interested in is EEGs, is like a brain computing interface, because I think once you've accepted the fact of putting something on your head, there's a lot more we can capture than eye tracking. There's like heartbeats, there's movement everywhere, there's so eye tracking, but there's also cerebral waves, and we can do a lot of things with that. Yeah, and it's going to come tomorrow, it's going to be like that. I think in 10 years from now, we will be able to change the content depending on your feelings. That's pretty obvious.
Few questions. One, I was just looking at a couple articles about the 7-figure deal with City Lights, but how are they going to distribute it? It doesn't say.
No, nobody knows.
They bought the rights.
So they bought it.
It's actually, so what is this deal with City Lights? It's a studio kind of deal. It means that they come in, the project, they buy all of the exploitation rights, but they actually buy all of the exploitation rights that we haven't sold yet. So so what they do is actually take our distribution plan and then add on top of it. Okay, so it means that so they are investing in actually the right to license and exploit the content. As long as they haven't recouped their investment, they keep like the majority of the profit. But then as right holders, we benefit from the rest of it once he recouped. So what he's doing right now, just to answer that, if you look at the numbers of partners we have, you know that Oculus financed a bit of it. We released the holodeck version, so we have a dome version. So that's another part of the project. That's another exploitation deal. We have Intel, that is part of the project. And then now it leaves like mostly the location-based part. So what City Lights and us are working on right now are mapping all of the distribution that is going to be happening around Spheres. And it's pretty interesting because Spheres, and the reason why Spheres got bought, I think it's mostly a content reason. It's a strong IP, Hollywood IP model because of the celebrities we have in the project, but also in terms of content, it's about space, it's entertainment, but it's also really educational. It's science-proofed. So it means that the exploitation we're going to be able to do is both on the entertainment and on the educational side.
I was going to ask about that. So
Yes.
you are going to education.
Yes.
How do you see that working? Like, will people, schools buy headsets?
All of the educational ecosystem that you know better than me, yes, there are schools, but there are also museums. So there are a lot of places that are eager to show this kind of content. And if we are able to map that in a clever way, the kind of figures we're talking about are actually really easy to reach.
And what kind of company
we'll see.
is
City Lights actually is, how can I comment on that? It's, I don't necessarily think that City Lights is a name that will stay. It's kind of it's just like a LLC, a body that bought the rights to the movie and that will exploit it, right? So it's just it's actually not to say the name of the investors.
Okay.
You know,
So
it's
it
private.
really exists.
So
So it's a
just
shell company.
just consider that it's private money. The only thing that there is to understand is that it's private money.
So along those lines, have you seen, in terms of another way to think about ecosystems, have you seen startups and distribution? You know, in film, all these different parts are done by different
Yes.
companies, right?
We actually advocate for that. We hope, and with what we do, we want to say, okay, we are producers, we are doing this content, but we want to focus on doing amazing content.
Yeah.
We don't want to be selling it. Because what happened with the movies we have done before, Notes on Blindness, for example, or iFlip, or Alteration, all of those movies, we have calls from like, hey, hi, I'm a movie theater in Ukraine, and I want to show your movie. Okay, I'm going to send you a contract, and blah, blah, blah. And then you spend your day dealing like $500 contracts, right? And it's just another business. It's not ours. So what we want ultimately at the end of the day is to show that people like us are able to produce high quality content that is commercially viable in a good amount of time, and that you can distribute in LBE. But then there should be other companies handling the distribution part. I totally agree with you. And there will be, if we go on doing deals like this, and not only us but other companies, there will be companies doing that.
Have you heard about the new one around airplanes?
Oh, yeah.
He's wearing a.
No, that's not related, but
The distribution in airport
Oh, yeah.
terminals.
they've been around for like 3 years. Like they've been in every festival telling us, we're going to buy your content. Like they are all over the place. So yeah, we
They
know.
started one, they're apparently opening one at LaGuardia.
Yeah, that's what they said, but they said that like 2 years ago already.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen it. So as long like.
Early filming train stations.
Oh, yeah?
And if I can add to that, LaGuardia and Schiphol Airport, we were in contact for the project we did with the UN. We were in contact with both because they wanted to acquire content. The UN has relationships, surprisingly, with Schiphol and LaGuardia. The big talk was we want to buy a content, make it an installation. People are going to spend some time there. It's going to be attracting people that have nothing else to do in between flights.
Yeah.
And the end result was that they were selling us the space to use. And I thought,
Yeah.
that's killing the deal. Now I see why everybody's excited about this and don't get
Yeah.
into it. All of a sudden, they were selling the space to use
Yeah.
for the right to. In other
Yeah.
words, it's as though you're buying your time in a movie theater to show your film that they've bought distribution rights
Yeah.
to. So
Actually, Sheila was the one who introduced me to that woman, right? Is that?
Yeah, she was talking about a launch, I believe, at JFK.
Is it Lynn? It's Lynn?
Lynn?
Miss Rosenthal?
What's her name?
Liz Rosen?
Liz or Lynn? Yeah.
Kind of a-
Blonde
Yeah.
woman. Yeah, I remember. I know her. But yeah, it's like we have a lot of people like this that are saying we are opening location-based places. So the way we operate usually with those kind of profiles is like, okay, show us like pictures of where you're going to operate and your contract model. Because most of the time it's like revenue sharing. And as a producer, if you engage in those kind of deals saying I'm going to give you the content in revenue sharing, you can be sure that like nobody else is going to buy it in exclusive. So I think that location-based kind of deals are really dangerous on the first windows of exploitation. So we're not in a rush.
It was also to constrain the kinds of content that we would even consider. And
Very
it's
mainstream.
almost like, I was like kind of thinking through like some of the projects that we've supported. And some,
Yeah, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
It was pure money.
Yeah, I think it's the same for us because most of the content we do are actually things that, if you look at Notes on Blindness and you're like going to an investor and saying, I'm going to use VR to talk about blindness, most of them in the US are going to look at you and say, what are you talking to me about? It's just like never going to happen. So that's why, most of the content we actually do and produce. But when you look at Battle Scar, it's a queer story about the New York punk scene of the 70s. And it talks about drugs and maybe it's going to have sex in it. So like, something like nobody wants to invest in here in the US, but that we can make happen in Europe.
You had.
Well, I was just watching there's airplanes as well as airports. I mean, I know there's a few
Yes.
I know.
To rent out headsets on airplanes, and that's to talk about sort of captive audience that does some kind of
Yeah,
people there
yeah.
sit down. I don't know if you
Everything. I mean, I look positively on all of these things. I hope that they are not going to make mistakes in what they buy. Most of the problem with location-based right now, I talked a lot with Chinese distributors. One of them has a mandate to build 800 location-based places, 800, right, in the next, or 600, in the next 18 months. So what is he doing? He's raising funds, like a whole lot of money, to build those things. And then he's coming to you and saying, like, I don't have a dime for content. Because it costs so much to put, like, this kind, to operate, like, Oculus Rift and those kind of machines already in location-based, that then the content is, like, usually not following. So I'm really afraid. I'm looking at it, but I'm really concerned about what the kind of things that they will show, because they could fail because of the content. So again, I look really positively at every new thing that's coming out in location-based, but I also hope that they have a sense of responsibility on what they're showing to the end users, because they could kill the market.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about location-based. So a recent conversation on a panel about accessibility and the types of stories we show, I thought was a shift in paradigm, thinking about location-based, even in the types of projects that get support. So, of course, there's public funders that can go, especially with the Canadian model, for political, more assertive projects or subject matters that aren't mainstream or not focusing merely on entertainment. But the problem is always when these funders are private, part of the discourse then becomes, you know, the majority of people who have headsets at home or Oculus headsets or HTC Vive headsets at home are white, higher class males of such age gap or bracket. So that's what we're targeting because that's our public. When you start talking about location-based, and Five Center in Montreal is like the alternative, it's actually more women than men. It's about 55 to 60% of their visitors are female. The generation bracket, the age bracket spans across 3 generations. They're a lot older and a lot younger than the market for people who own a headset. And so the discourse changes, even if you're making it for the money. When you think differently about who you're distributing to and how, it also changes the types of content that get produced when it's just focused on making money out of this. So even if you're talking to private investors who want to know if your project has a potential for making money and is really market driven, talking about location-based changes the nature of the conversation. So I really think there's something there, and of course then the questions were asked in that same panel, yeah, but that means it has to be in the city, and not everybody has access to cities. Sure, you're back to another model, but that already changes, kind of saying this is a museum-like approach or cinema-like approach versus, game-like approach.
Yeah.
So the models are very different, but they target different publics. And through history, if you look at how we target the audience for these different types of outlets, it's very different in the content as well. You just see how driven the game industry has been pushing hard to change their model of who's the targeted audience. It's been hard. It's a lot harder than films, for instance. And it's a lot more open for museums. So just thinking your distribution model in terms of location and who gets access changes the entire nature of the conversation. You mentioned something the other day about your project in Vestige, which I thought was really interesting, in how they're pushing for stories and innovation. And it is a field, it's an emergent medium that needs innovation so much, just because it's what drives the hype, but also what keeps driving the hope and interest for more and diversified content. And that's because it's innovative, surprising, and meaningful. You were telling, I don't think it's a secret, you could say it in the front of the camera, but Vestige is actually personalized experience?
Yes.
You don't advertise it?
No, it's just that we don't market it that way. It's actually a multipass narrative. So when you get into Vestige, we create this relationship between you and the hologram. And the hologram are telling you a story. And depending on how close you are from the hologram, they are going to tell you more or less intimate stories. So your experience is going to be 15 to 20 minutes long. I think there's a total of like 45 minutes of content. So it's really, it really cannot happen that you see twice the same movie, but you don't realize it, and we don't market it. I mean, I don't think personally, I never thought multipass narrative was a good idea to market, because actually whatever you do, you choose a path, right? So you don't know what would happen. So it doesn't matter. What matters is the experience as a user, and the way I choose to present it is to say you have a relationship with holograms that's different every time. It's just like you can feel, like we are trying to create a relationship between you, just a physical, like your body is the joystick, in a sense. So that's what I advertise when I talk about Vestige, not the fact that it's technologically advanced, like volumetric capture, multipass narrative, but the fact that you actually just create a relationship with holograms. And in Vestige, it's really funny. I mean, I personally experienced it. Maybe you did also, but it's kind of a dance with holograms. Like you have these shapes. It's like point clouds, right? But that we redesigned. And they're telling you a story. And because there's this sense, we really worked on this sense of distance. Whenever they talk to you and like they walk around you, you kind of like, it's nearly like you could feel them touch you, right? So that's what really we wanted to do with Vestige. That's why we think it's an interesting piece, not only because of the content, because of the way we operated this technology. Yes.
Curious, like the history of amusement parks and how they developed. Too, like it's a whole different way of
Of course.
exhibition and stuff. So,
And even
like,
yesterday,
what's the VR amusement park? But it sounds like this guy is trying to develop that.
Amusement parks, yeah, we'd love to have more contracts with amusement parks, because amusement parks typically they have exclusive material, so they want to, like us, to create original kind of content that people will want to experience in their parks. Yes.
and they're massively
But then, like,
invested.
there's also for LBE, the danger of this is probably that right now a lot of people are operating different location-based schemes, so different type of technology that you can experience here or there. But at the end of the day, in terms of marketing, it makes more sense if, say, I'm doing like the Ghostbuster experience, and you can see it somewhere in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, LA, Paris, not only like now in New York. So that's, I think, the danger of location-based. There should be some kind of consensus on the technology that is used in location-based, so creators can access this technology and distribute it more easily, and so we can advertise for a content that you can find like across the world. That's one of the big limits of LBE and big dangers also of the way we are currently developing LBE. So maybe that's something we will want to do. Just to provide tools for creators and location-based that are really cheap, even for free. I don't know, I'm going to try to look at the Open Innovation Scheme and make it financed maybe by the European Union. So we deliver tools for people to operate location-based, because at the end of the day, the whole ecosystem will benefit from it. So someone has to deliver that technology. So I'm trying to think of that, yes.
Yeah, it's also innovation of architecture. Right? It's going to be the architecture.
Totally. But there's a few challenges in LBE that are really interesting. One of them is the feeling of presence. So what's your experience if you're alone and like some friends are somewhere doing the same experience but you don't see them? Imagine an experience where you solve a puzzle or you do something but you see your friends. The feeling of presence is something that's really challenging, I think, for VR, and potentially can be solved through LBE and multiplayer, then, which is the second side of it. So that are the directions in which we are looking, and Chris Milk has been really talented in doing that. But in Life of Us, for example, you don't see. In Life of Us, it would be so much better if you could see yourself, right?
Yeah.
So we could do that.
Yeah.
It's possible.
I was going to say, so flashback from the Berlin, another European market emerging. We were offered tours of what's happening in Berlin. I just thought it was surprising. Marshmallow Laser Feast were here a couple of weeks ago saying, I don't know, the Germans, they're preparing something. We can feel it. You know, there's a lot of money being spent to invite us to Germany to see what's happening in Germany.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about Germany? And I realized a lot of co-production incentives are pushing towards Germany. So my biggest question was, what's happening in Germany? And they're doing location-based escape rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's multiplayer location-based games where you need to be smart, escape from places, and so kind of collective puzzles. And the other thing that they're really trying to push is research and development for new ways of interacting with materials in real time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you could see yourself
Like hero.
in an experience where you literally see yourself almost in real time in a VR experience. So I was mentioning how trippy that was, but how comfortable, surprisingly, it was.
The one at Sundance you're talking about?
No, not that. That for me is a tech demo. When you were talking, a lot of that works. It's interesting, but it works, but not so much.
Where have you seen it?
Berlin. So German experiences, they spent 3 years in research and development to understand your relationship to virtual holograms
Yeah.
and images, and it made me think a lot more of Vestige, where it feels so natural and you don't understand why you almost feel warmth. So your mentioning of feeling warmth was very real. I could see my own hologram and touch my own hands, and you can almost feel the warmth. There's research to be made on how the limbic system works to make you believe that, but it really does work. So it's pushing in research and development on the neurological aspects of immersion, and they're pushing a lot in games, collective location-based games.
And extending the heritage collections, 50 million Berlin alone in a 3-year period to do these kinds of extensions of their heritage stuff.
So, and they're pushing massively. They want to be a new model of everything. They're just pushing an economy.
Who's
So
they in Berlin, like what?
there's multiple, a lot of players. It's just surprising. Yeah, cultural, but a lot of R&D, musical
Like at
groups.
universities too?
Universities are pushing it as well, for sure.
DFG is having these like mega national initiatives.
But even pushing drones.
But it's kind of recent because it's like
very
we've been speaking with Germany like a couple of years ago.
Me
There
too.
was nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. And so it's a very fast moving, but kind of expanding into holograms, AI, drones,
Cool.
games, location based.
Yeah.
And the government is
Yeah,
help.
that's great. That's what's great with Europe. When one government decides to subsidize, then we can have substantial
Anywhere
funds.
but America.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
So
Thank
thank
you.
you so much.